Hello there, and welcome to another paint night in a jar session. Today we are working with the prompt photography, and you can see me here trying to set up my used book or old book that I'm using as a journal. This painting is done in acrylic, and so I need to gesso the pages before I start painting, just so that the paint doesn't seep right through the pages and whichever. So I'm using gesso sludge here, which I find is a very nice, cheaper alternative to more expensive gesso that I would use for paintings on canvas and that kind of thing. Because the journal stays with me. There's nothing too fancy about it, but I do need something to prep the pages with, and so I'm using the gesso sludge. It acts just like gesso. It's really good for that. I believe I read on the back of it that it is created by the remnants of the process of creating the gesso, so it's still it will have a bit of a tint to it. It's not white. This one that I have is slightly gray, and which is fine because I need it. I'm gonna paint over it anyway, so it's all good. So we need to let this dry now before I start the actual painting. So it's already, well, it's November now. There's a lot of snow on the ground and everything, but I was kind of feeling like I wanted something more, excuse me, like I wanted something more to do with fall, because I hadn't been painting about fall much. So I chose a photo from Unsplash of these pumpkins and squash, these two bins. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm trying to draw them. Now, a lot of times I find myself doing this, even though I know that I shouldn't. Just that I'm so, I don't know, not anxious. I can't wait to just get the painting started. So I start sketching it before I do the background. And in acrylic, it's really a lot easier to do the background first and then sketch your foreground in there. Although it can be done this way as well. It's a little bit more finicky is all. And you can see me there. I'm using an eraser, black eraser, to erase my my marks, my pencil marks there. And the pencil I'm using is a pastel pencil. I like the pastel pencil more so than any other pencil because when it comes in contact with water or any water-based medium, it dissolves. It doesn't leave a trace. It's so much better than even watercolor pencils, or maybe I just don't have the right watercolor pencils. But even when I do a watercolor painting, I sketch it out with a pastel pencil, and they can be smudged out too. So I find that very, very easy. So for this, I'm using Americana paints from Deco Art, and I used, this painting was a challenge for me. I used it as a challenge to challenge myself. I didn't want to use my regular paints. I haven't been using these Americana paints for like forever. I generally leave them for my mixed media journaling and that kind of thing, because they're so thin. And I don't use thin paints like this. I like the opaqueness that you get with acrylic paints, and this was a challenge. And to be honest, there were a few moments in there when I said, holy cow, I'm not ever going to use this again, ever, because it was so painful. But it turned out okay. The painting turned out really good. So goes to show you, right? Am I going to use these again? to be very honest, probably I'll get into a crazy mood again and say, let's challenge myself again and see how that turns out, and curse myself throughout the whole thing. But yeah, so I'm using here similar techniques, not similar, the same techniques I would use with my regular paints. I usually use, what do I use? Liquitex paints. So, and that means that I am mixing the paints on the canvas or on the page here as opposed to on my palette. I like that because it gives a lot of freedom. The colors are not prescribed the way that they mix. It's kind of however they mix, and that's fine as long as I get a mix. I like that. So however, I noticed that mixing like that on paper, on thin paper, the kind of thin paper that I have in this book, it's tricky. It definitely, paper doesn't act the same way as canvas. Definitely not. So there's some considerations to be made, and when there's been quite a lag in between my paintings, it's like I forget all of that, and then I get into the painting proper, and then I remember, oh yeah, I was supposed to do it this other way instead. Oh well. So I think, this happened here as well. And I was just reminded very strongly, the limitations of paper. I didn't rip any of the paper, but still. And the limitations of these particular paints here. An added challenge with this was that I did not have black or white because I threw them out. They were too transparent. I did not like them at all. They weren't doing what I needed them to do in previous applications that I was trying to do, not for this painting. So I decided to throw them out, and that's what I did. So that meant that I did not have any black or white. I could have used, I suppose, my black or white from the other paints that I have, the Liquitex, but because the texture is different, I didn't want to mix them. These are very translucent, very thin, watery paints, and my Liquitex are very thick. By comparison, are very, very thick, and they're opaque. And I didn't want to run into any issues in trying to make two very different textured paints try to work together. So I did my best trying to darken the colors as much as I could using this brown, using this brown here. And you can only darken them up to a certain degree, right? Especially considering that the paints are so translucent, so you need to have several layers of them. And you can tell that these paints have been sitting for a while because I got this blob of coming out of there before the paint came out. So I really needed to mix them up really good. As I was saying before, I'm using a reference photo from Unsplash, and initially I was trying to get as close to the real colors that were represented in the reference photo, and then I realized that I really couldn't, because I didn't have the right colors myself, the right tints, and besides it was different. It wasn't my regular painting supply, so it will need to be different. So around the second part of this video or of this painting, where I went in for the second layer, is when I sort of realized, you know what, I need to work with the paints as opposed to against them. And there is this point in any painting, no matter what painting I do, where I start off with, I need to be loyal to the reference photo, And then I realized, no, I need to be loyal to my painting. And the painting will need something different. Inevitably, it wants something different. So I go with that. And it creates a more cohesive painting. It creates a lot more freedom. I'm not constrained so much. I can interpret the photo and go with that. I was also using stiffer than usual brushes, or rather stiffer than my usual brushes. And even as I was realizing that the paint doesn't act that or doesn't behave the way I want it to, and it's probably also because of my brush, I'm seeing too many brush strokes in there. I was at that point where, just out of spite, I didn't want to change my brushes. Just out of spite, I was already starting to get pissed off. So I continued with the same brushes, and the brush strokes disappear on my second or third layer. Once everything's dry and I go back in, it looks a lot better. But yeah, I get those moments as well, just out of spite. One thing I would like to say, and I don't want to detract from the deco art company making this paint, not all that. When I'm complaining about them, it's because of the way that I paint. So they're perfectly fine paints. You can use them for various things. It's just in the way that I use them, and the way I paint, I very much more so connect with thicker paints, more paints that have more body, as opposed to more watery paints like this. I mean, there's nothing wrong with these. I don't know. I don't think they are a light fast. I haven't really checked into that myself. So, but for this project, it really didn't matter. And if you have Americana paints and that's all you have to work with, you work with them, right? They're fine. They're little projects like this. I don't think that I would use them to make more professional pieces that I would want to sell, for example, and that's just because of how I work. I want to have light fast paints that are going to last and not fade and all that. But again, that's just my value in the concept of creating something that I want to sell. You can have other values in there, and that's fine, right? That's you, this is me. So I just wanted to put that out there, that the Americana paints, geez, I can't talk today. The Americana paints are just fine. I'm complaining because I paint differently. I don't paint this way. So it's all very subjective. So all I'm doing at this stage is just that the initial put something down on paper. I really, because the paints are so thin, I need to have several layers. And you get your base layer down somewhere in the middle, not too light and not too dark either, so that later on the second layer we can do the shadows and the lights and that kind of thing. So I'm sort of just blocking in my various objects here. So I let my painting dry, and as you can see, I was using one of those paper palettes that once you're done, you just rip the page out. All the paints dried up really quickly overnight, so I just threw them out, and it's fine because I have enough to go around, and I'm not using too much all at once, so I didn't feel like I was wasting any. So now I'm going over on a second layer and the final details and such. So I put in a bunch of my colors that I needed to work with, and I changed. Oh, here's what I changed my brush. I got a much softer brush, which ended up working much better. And I'm working on getting some of those details to the bins and whatnot to make it look like a bin. To show the wood grain and all that. So that's what I'm doing here. And I'm pretty much using, not pretty much, this is exactly what I'm using, a dry brush sort of technique to it. Because the paints are so thin, I'm not adding any water to them or to my brush. I'm just going straight in with my brush as it is dry. And, you know, you get more paint on your brush, and then you're going to get a thicker application of the paint. You take smaller amounts of paint on the brush, you get more of this dry brush effect where it kind of skips over the paper and you can still see the layers underneath and that kind of thing. And I was doing that on purpose because I wanted to have more depth to my bin to make it look like there's more to it than just a flat sort of surface. It creates more depth, it creates more interest this way. Plus, I was trying to get some perspective going on a little bit to show that, you know, the bin in the back is maybe not getting quite as much light, and so therefore it's further in the distance a little bit, that kind of thing. So it's darker. Plus, the actual color of the bins was different in the reference photo as well, so I just went with that. You can definitely tell also by the location of the second bin that it's supposed to be slightly behind the other bin. It's further into the distance just a little bit, still in the foreground but a little bit more into the distance. And right here I'm trying to fix up the ground in the foreground here. There's shadows happening and all of that, just trying to give a bit more sense of a perspective happening so that it adds some depth to the painting. It's not such a flat surface. So I'm touching up the background and whatnot. So I guess just a note on these paint night in a jar series that I'm working on in here. I don't think I've ever been able to do one all at once. Actually, I have. Yeah. If they're small enough, I can complete one in that one sitting. Maybe it takes an hour or so, or 2 hours. Something like this, though, I had to use it in separate, finish it in separate sittings. So the second part here is, it's morning, it's day when I'm painting this. The previous one was at night. I like these jars with prompts because it gives me an idea of what to paint. and then I go research it, and so that takes a little bit of time as well. And depending on how much time I have at night, when I sit down for one of these sessions, I'll be able to start the painting or maybe not start the painting. I definitely envision some sort of, what are we painting today? Let's get a prompt and, oh, look, this is what we're painting today, and paint it. It's not always like that though, just because of, life. Sometimes I have more time, sometimes I don't. So I kind of go with the flow on that one. I just thought to maybe explain it a little bit. So because I didn't have white and I couldn't lighten up the paints any more than they already were, for the highlights I just used the pure paint as it came out of the tube, because I couldn't get it any lighter than that. You can get it darker, but you can't get it any lighter. So I'm using the paint as is from the tubes, and I'm saying, okay, this layer right here needs to remain this way because this is the highlight. So almost like watercolor sort of approach to it. And then I'm darkening it up. So for the yellow squash there thing that I just did on the right hand side there, I used some red to get it a bit more orangey. I also used some brown. Brown is really good for darkening things up. It's a very earthy color, so I used it for the darker highlights, or sorry, lowlights, the darker shadows. And really my purpose or my focus at this point is to get that 3D effect going on. So I'm really focusing on darkening it up where I need to darken it up so that it looks like it's a 3D object. And yellow right here, I just realized, I remembered, yellow makes a very good highlight. No matter the paint, or rather the color, the base color, you add some yellow, it's this splash of warm light. So I use yellow a lot for my highlights. So yeah, so this is what I'm doing here in trying to add some roundness to my squash and that kind of thing. So, you know, the red, you darken it up. You use as much as possible the red from the bottle, right? But there's only so much you can get out of it that way. And you darken it up with some brown. You put in some yellow in there, as you can see, and it really looks like this. There's got some light on it. And as I said previously, because I didn't have the proper tints to these colors, I had to go with what I had and make it work. And the best way to make it work that way is to really look at your darks and your lights. And it really doesn't matter what color you use. If it's a green pumpkin or a brown pumpkin, I mean, right, this one right here in the left corner here, I think it was supposed to be dark green in the reference photo, and it ended up just being brown for mine because I couldn't get dark enough. So I said, okay, I'm changing it to brown then, but I'm still putting in some highlights on it, right? So it still looks good. And so I guess the moral of the story is to sort of go with the flow and not get too caught up on what the painting should be, because you're an artist, you're a painter. You make it what you want it to be. So yeah, once you get past that stage, right? Once I got past that stage of freaking out because it wasn't turning out the way that my reference photo was supposed to be, then I really enjoyed the painting process more. I really enjoyed the painting itself more because I was aligned with it more, as opposed to trying to make it do what I want. There's little moments like this in every painting, I swear. Like it never gets old. It never gets old. And I like it that way, right? It's every time, you know, I realize, yeah, this is why I paint. This is what painting is supposed to be for me. I mean, for you, maybe you want something different out of it, but for me, you know, just having that calm, peaceful moment. And just a note, I'm interrupting myself here, but just a note on what I'm doing to this brown squash here is, because the paints are so thin and so watery, I can remove them from a dried base the way that I would remove watercolor. And that is by having a clean brush, slightly wet, and I'm sort of just smudging it. I'm lifting the paint off. And then I'm washing my brush again and going in again. And that way, when I added a bit too much of that yellow and I realized, no, that's too much, right? I reshaped what that highlight looked like. Something that you can't really do with acrylic paints that are thicker, but with these ones you can. So I was very happy of that. And again, it's not like I pre-planned it, right? Right here, I'm going to put too much, and then I'm going to have to think about how to take it off. And this is how I'm going to take it off. I kind of just went with it. I felt it, I suppose. I work with the paint, right? I didn't panic. I just went with the paint, and I noticed that because it's so thin, I can just sort of lift it, and that's the technique I used. I'm getting to the end of the painting here, and I just wanted to say, I hope you enjoyed this painting, and maybe it gives you ideas on what to paint and what not. And if you liked it, please hit the like button for this video, and I hope to see you next time.